L&D people are probably getting overwhelmed because they think they're having to create a lot more content, but actually the feedback they're getting is none of this is driving the desired impact on the organization. We're now developing a low tolerance for anything that's passive, generic, one size fits all, right? We've just got a low tolerance for it. So sitting down to do a 2-hour course is just not happening. Learning at speed is not about doing everything faster. It's about cutting the waste. And waste is anything that doesn't connect the dots between learning skills and business performance. And so really going back to that, what are the pieces you need to put into place to be able to do that? Where you're thinking about not what content do people need and how do I get it to them. Instead, you should be asking what skills do people need and how do I help them build those skills?
This is how we learn now.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, So Energy, Forsaven, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.
Nelson, I cannot tell you how excited I am. We are flipping the script today and you are in the hot seat. How do you feel?
I feel scared.
No, don't feel scared. Honestly, we're just going to have a great chat. I'm so excited to pick your brains on the state of L&D today. But yeah, it's going to be nice seeing you on the other side because I know I've got big shoes to fill with you being the normal host.
I'm sure you'll be fine. It's me who's going to get grilled. All right, let's go.
Let's go. Let's dive straight in. Look, it's no secret that people are overwhelmed. There's a lot of content available out there. So what do you think HR and L&D leaders can do to adapt their roles to fit to the overwhelming amount of content that's out there?
Yeah, I think it's important to take a step back and look at even before generative AI came into the space, we were living in a post-content world, right? Where content was cheap and it was abundant and lack of content wasn't a problem. And then you threw generative AI into the mix, which made it infinitely easier for us to be able to create lots more content. And when you have so much content out there, the biggest challenge is actually discovery. How do you find the most relevant, meaningful content amongst this? That kind of drives a change in role that L&D teams play, where, once upon a time as an L&D team, you probably built out almost a content production factory type infrastructure, right? You've got your instructional designers, you've got the tools for creating content, and it was all around mainly how am I going to create and share this content? But that massively changes in a post-content world where most of your work needs to be around how do I connect the right learning with the right people at the right time? And I think this overwhelming feeling is not just for L&D professionals. Actually, think about the people, the employees on the other side, because they're the ones who are getting tons and tons of content going, where do I find what I need? And L&D people are probably getting overwhelmed because they think they're having to create a lot more content or curate a lot more content. But actually the feedback they're getting is none of this is driving the desired impact on the organization. And so really to tackle this, we need to change our thinking around this, right? Is shift from a kind of content first approach to learning and development to a more what we would call a skills first approach, where you're thinking about not what content do people need and how do I get it to them. Instead, you should be asking what skills do people need and how do I help them build those skills?
That's so correct. Even when I think about my experience, if I'm looking for content on leadership, there's so many places I can look. There's just so much information out there. It's just about narrowing it down. So then with that in mind, why do you think that there are so few L&D programs that actually have a lasting impact on their employees?
I think the main problem comes down to the alignment between what we're doing in L&D and what the business wants to see. Right? Every business has a mission, it has a strategy on how it's going to achieve that mission and a bunch of objectives to see whether it's on track or not. Now, if you look at most L&D programs and initiatives and you ask them, which one of these objectives is your learning program trying to move, quite often the problem is that's an afterthought. right? You'll be lucky if up front we're just thinking about learning metrics, but the reality is learning metrics are secondary here, right? Like how much time someone spent, how much of the program was completed. These are all leading signals of engagement, but this is not the reason why the business invested time and money, and it's not the reason why employees are giving up their time to engage with this learning, right? It really needs to come back down to how are you moving that objective? And this is why we had Ajay actually on one of our previous episodes of L&D Disrupt and talking about the idea of it's business metrics we should be looking at. Oh, absolutely. It's business metrics that tells us whether we're having a meaningful impact on the business or not. But another metric for us to look at is actually skills, right? Skills tells us whether we're building the capability within the business to be able to deliver those objectives or not. And I think that's the disconnect right now, right? Okay, you've got this program over here, you've got this OKR over here. How do we connect the dots between these two things? And I think that's where skills is that shared language, right? Like I can look at an objective and say, okay, to achieve this OKR, here are the roles that contribute to that, right? Like it's the CSM or it's the sales rep that's going to contribute to this OKR. And then I can look at what skills do each of these roles need to be able to deliver that objective? And then I can work backwards to go, okay, what learning is going to help me build those skills to deliver that objective? And when you have that, you're now able to connect the dots between learning and business. And when you don't have, that's when you tend to have learning programs that are not getting the engagement. Maybe you force the engagement by making it mandatory, but you get the feedback that actually there's been no behavior change. Business is sitting there going, what was the impact of that? Was the difference of what you did? It's when they continue to look at L&D teams as a cost center that's just ticking a box. That's where you get a lot of that frustration and overwhelming feeling we talked about at the beginning comes from this disconnect. And we believe that skills is that missing link, right? It's that shared context that connects learning to business.
I think we've all been there where I know sometimes in the past I've received emails like, you have to do this, you have to do that. But then why do you think there are so many businesses that aren't measuring it in this way? Because when you put it like that, it makes so much sense. Why do you think they still track it in terms of how much content has been consumed or how much time has been spent, how many courses have been complete? Why is that, do you think?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the big shift is probably the fact that a lot of what traditional learning and development teams have done is inherited from how we think about education. And a lot of that thinking around education comes from school, colleges, universities, right? Where it is all about content and content distribution. That's the reason why we have the lecture format. There's a sage on stage. You've got a bunch of people listening to one person sharing and distributing content. There's an exam to see whether you've done it or not. But there's a massive difference between the workplace and school, university, right? Quite often at school and university, we learn things that we might never apply in our life, right? Like I'd love to know how many people listening to this ever use Pythagoras theorem in life or in work, right? Do comment, let us know. Most people I know and come across don't use it on a day-to-day basis, but work isn't that, right? Workplace learning, the point of it is you should be applying more of what you're learning at work than anything. And so you're learning within the context where you can apply what you're learning. So it's very different to traditional education. So using the same techniques and tools as traditional education within workplace learning, which is actually meant for a very different purpose, I think that's where the disconnect is. And we've inherited that and turned into content and creating a lot of content and distributing it. I think that's one level. The other level is also it's easier, right? It's easier to create content and generate a lot of output. It's a lot harder to strategically align learning to skills and to drive business performance, especially without the right tools, right? And I think AI plays a massive part now in taking away a lot of the friction that would have typically been there to be able to connect those dots. AI can massively help. And so I think what's worrying now is with tools and technology that can help us actually have a meaningful impact, instead of we're using AI and these tools just to create content faster and be a bit more efficient, we are really missing the point. And I don't think we can afford to do that anymore. Like a recent study that came out in, I think it was a training journal, showed 57% of L&D professionals have reported feeling more under pressure from the executive team to prove ROI. That's only going to get higher. because everyone has to prove that where their time and money is going within an organization in a very competitive space. And so you are going to have to prove what impact you're having on the business, and showing completion and time spent learning is just not good enough. And so I do think this pressure that's being applied to prove ROI more than ever before will drive a change in how we think about learning and development.
It's so interesting when you were talking about learning in education being different from learning in the workplace, because I've got a degree that's like, I've seen even memes about it online. It's like, I've got a degree, great condition, never been used. It's true. Like what I did in placement felt so disconnected with what actually happens in the workplace. And I can say, for one, I've not used Pythagoras theorem in a while. So it definitely makes sense, like learning by doing. But then in that case, what do you think is really the biggest blind spot for L&D professionals today? Like, how do we actually connect it to business outcomes? Is there like somewhere where they should be looking? I know you touched on skills already.
Yeah, so if you think about it through the approach or the philosophy that you want to take here is to go, how am I going to connect the dots between learning skills and then skills to business to see the impact I'm having on the workplace? So let's break that down to go, what are the blockers that are stopping me from being able to do that? The first thing is knowing what skills each person in the organization needs to have, and then knowing what skills they actually have. Now, the reality is most organizations don't know that, right? There is a gut feels. I'm sure some people have an opinion on what skills and proficiency levels people need to have. And quite often what is companies who go on the journey of trying to solve this problem, they go to every manager in the business and they'll go, what skills do you think the person in your team needs to have? The managers, I think they need to have skill A and B. And then if an ambitious L&D or HR person's there, they might go, okay, to what proficiency level? And they'll go, I've never really thought about this, but I think it might be a 3 out of 5.
Yeah.
And what you end up happening is departments can't agree on the name for a skill because everyone thinks the skill name has got to be something special. And so it takes you like 9 to 12 months to end up with a spreadsheet that no one uses because it's in a spreadsheet. It's difficult to operationalize in the organization. And whose job is it to keep the spreadsheet up to date? No one wants to keep it up to date because it took 9 to 12 months to get together in the first place. Because of that effort and what then gets looked at as wasted effort, that's the reason why we never got to a point in most organizations of understanding the workforce through what skills they have and what skills they need. And so that's the first thing to be able to do, is to understand where your skills gaps are. Because unless you know that, you can't align your learning to those gaps and have a meaningful impact.
You were mentioning about the skills you have versus the skills you need. If those skills are always changing, like I've been reading statistics about the skills that we have today are not really all going to be relevant in 2 to 5 years' time. Like, how would you even manage that? That's just a big problem in itself.
Yeah, and that's exactly why that traditional approach of going to each one of your managers and getting the skills and putting it into a spreadsheet is just not sustainable, right? For that exact reason, what we need to be able to do, and this is why AI plays a massive role in this, what we can do now is we can look at real-time labor market data. Right? This is exactly what we do at How Now, is to look at labor market data. We're able to look at what are the job roles that exist on the market. Then we're able to deconstruct those jobs into tasks. And that's a key differentiator in the approach that we take, because it's not your jobs that require skills. It's the tasks that you do within your job that require skills. So we deconstruct those jobs into tasks. Then we infer what skill and skill level do I need to be able to execute that task. And then you end up with a skills ontology that connects essentially job roles, tasks, and skills, and then skill clusters. Now, once you have, that's not a one and done, right? It's a living, breathing thing, right? And so, for example, you can start to look at, for example, you take something like generative AI blowing up. That's going to have a massive impact on the tasks that you need to do in your job role. And so you'll start to see, say there's 10 tasks I need to do in my role, maybe now 4 of those are automated by generative AI, right? So there's no point me developing the skills to do those 4 tasks. Instead, I need to focus on the skills that the other 6 tasks require. And now there's 2 new tasks that I didn't need to do before that I need to do now. And that's why leveraging AI, connecting it with a large market data set allows you to be able to constantly have this skills ontology that's evolving. So you're never falling behind in terms of the skills that you need to have and the skills that you actually have.
Without sounding really biased, that is super clever. And I think that is honestly is really great. And if you've not seen it, you do need to check it out. But that is an absolute time saver from the spreadsheets. So actually that you mentioned AI quite a bit. So let's pivot into that a bit more. How do you think AI and workplace agents are really changing the way that we learn? You mentioned like it's changing some of the roles that we have and how we approach tasks. But in terms of making it easier on facilitating learning, how do you think AI is having an impact there?
I think largely right now, how AI is being used is for efficiency gains, like I touched on earlier. I think we're not necessarily questioning, are we doing the right thing? Instead, we're just focusing on doing the thing. We're just like, let's make this more efficient, but I'm not too sure whether this task I should be still doing whatsoever. And that's largely how AI has been leveraged right now within L&D at least. Now, the problem with that is no one gets to keep their job for missing their target efficiently, right? You need to be effective, right? You need to do the right thing right.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to look at leveraging AI to not just be efficient, but to be more effective. So how do we do that? So let's go back to our philosophy of connecting the dots between learning, skills, and business. And this is where AI plays a massive role in the skills ontology, right? To be able to tell you on a continuous basis what skills are required by each role. AI can be instrumental in measuring your skills, right? You can now plug in productivity data from your CRM, your help desk, and any other tools people use to do work, and you can get AI to start making inferences based on your win rate or your sales cycle or how good you are at resolving customer queries. It can start to infer what your proficiency level is for a particular skill. So that takes out a lot of the friction involved from your side to be able to measure skills. We've got, for example, at How Now, Guru, which is an AI agent that can teach you, coach you, assess you, give you feedback. Now, one of the things Guru can do is evaluate the application of the skill, right? So I might do a self-reflection and say, look, I think I'm a 4 out of 5 in negotiation. Well, Guru can then create a real-world scenario to get you to apply that skill of negotiation by generating this simulation. And then at the end of it, it can evaluate and go, actually, this is where you're at. Like, this is what you could do better, and this is where you can improve. And so this is things that you can now do not only at scale efficiently, but it's a far more effective way of aligning learning to skills because these are things we weren't doing before because they were too difficult to do. And so I think what AI's critical role here is, it's going to help us do the things that we weren't doing because it required too much of a heavy lift, right? Both strategically, but also from a resource perspective. I'm excited for that. But I think if I take a step back and look at the big picture here, I think the role of AI here is essentially we're getting used to hyper-personalized, real-time, contextually aware interactions by using tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, etc. Now, what that means is we're now developing a low tolerance for anything that's passive, generic, one size fits all, right? We've just got a low tolerance for it. So sitting down to do a 2-hour course is just not happening now. We've got a super low tolerance for it. Now, there might be very specific use cases where I might engage in a course or a pathway, but in most cases, it's not good enough because I'm used to hyper-personalized real-time interactions that's contextually aware. And that's where we can really leverage AI agents that are purpose-built for learning, teaching, coaching, giving constructive feedback, for simulating practice, like what I mentioned with Guru, right? So I think that's what I'm really excited for because that scales something that we've not been able to scale in L&D, which is great teaching. Right? Many people listening to this have probably been on the receiving end of great one-to-one teaching where the person is tailoring every response to you. It's a two-way dialogue. They know your context. They know what you're good at, what you're not good at. They're able to give you instant feedback. They're not dumping curriculum on you. Instead, they're tailoring it for what you need to do to go from A to B. We've tried in L&D to scale this, but actually what we've ended up scaling is convenient content. But AI, for the first time, allows us to scale that one-to-one teaching. And that's really what I'm excited for.
That is super. I love like testing out Guru as well. When you have a physical mentor, sometimes you're on limited time, but with something like AI, you have endless possibilities. You can go back and forth all night, all day if you need to. And it really is just super, super scalable. Have you seen any applications of AI being used to develop skills in this way?
Yeah, many. And I think to your point, like finding a great teacher or mentor, yeah, is really kind of luck of the draw, right? And not everyone's going to give the same level of interaction and mentoring, teaching, and coaching. The great thing about an AI agent like Guru is you're essentially bottling up verified expertise and you're delivering it in a consistently high quality teaching, coaching, learning experience, right? Like everyone who engages is going to get a similar level of quality. So it's not restricted to the elite who can afford to get a coach. It's not a luck of the draw where if you find a good mentor, you can actually democratize this in such a meaningful, powerful way where everyone's now getting access to great teaching that they wouldn't have been able to before. And the extension of that is also, although we talk a lot about upskilling within the workplace, a lot of the content and learning opportunities we typically offer in the workplace are really knowledge-based, right? It's a lot of content. Like I watch a course or I sit in a lecture or a workshop. It's very knowledge-based. They're not often designed to be skills-based learning experiences that where you're learning by doing, right? And you're bridging that gap. That's the big difference with Guru because it is creating the environment for you to learn by doing. And what's been exciting is not only did we build Guru, but we also created a Guru studio where you can create your own gurus for different purposes, different roles and different functions. One I created was a prompt guru, right? Like I thought everyone needs to get better at prompt engineering. So why not create a guru that has verified world-class expertise around prompt engineering and can coach people and teach people to be better prompts. And not just for me, but I know for other people in the team who've used the prompt guru, it's been brilliant to be able to get feedback, to be able to practice. Yeah. It'll give you a situation and say, write a prompt for an AI tool to be able to get this. And I genuinely think my ability to write an effective prompt, and what's been really cool about it is because it automatically updates itself as models have changed. Say a new GPT comes out, it knows that, right? Because it's integrated and syncing up with content. And so it now changes how I need to prompt. So that's one example, right, of a skill.
But, I love how excited you got that. Because I was going to say, if someone was to search which gurus you've created for yourself and what skills you're developing, so is it the prompt one? Is that what?
Yeah, we've done a bunch of others around obviously things like leadership. It's like great for new managers, right? It can talk you through how to do your first one-to-one, how to do difficult conversations. There's a great one for kind of sales where how to negotiate, how to do objection handling, how to pitch, practice. One of the customers we work with was talking about a well-being guru, right? To talk you through kind of stress management and have a safe space to have that type of conversation, to get guided reflection. Yeah, it's incredible. You build something and you start hearing people use it in ways that you didn't even imagine it could be used. And the reality is the more we create and play with it and use it, the more we're realizing what skills it can be used for. I know the engineers in our team have created an engineering guru and you can use it for practicing more complex programming. And it's incredible. Like it just goes to show it's not restricted to what you would call human skills, right? Previously called soft skills. You could use it for technical skills as well.
I really like that well-being idea. There are so many people out there, without changing the subject too much, that generally just need someone to talk to. And sometimes having AI do that can take away a little bit of the stigma. But yeah, I think that's such a cool idea. We should definitely make that like a staple. No, that sounds like so much fun. But if you were giving advice to new L&D leaders then, and they were just completely starting out fresh, like, what would be the one thing that you would really tell them, this is the way to go, this is the priority you need to future-proof your strategy?
Yeah, I got to lean back on, I wrote a book called Learning at Speed. And
I'm a big fan.
And yeah, in the book, I talk with the core idea of it is we're living through an era of exponential change. And quite often we underestimate exponential change, right? Like we can't comprehend how fast exponential change is. And what happens when there's exponential changes, there's typically a lot of uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty, a couple of things can happen. There's a lot of threats, but there's also a lot of opportunities. And what you tend to find is the fastest learners amongst us, that could be individuals as well as organizations, they'll be able to figure out how to navigate this uncertainty, seize the opportunities, avoid the threats, and they will win, right? The slowest learners will fall behind, struggle to keep up within this uncertainty and exponential change, and fundamentally, they'll fall back too far that you go bust. So as an individual, that means you lose your job and you're no longer competitive in the job market. For an organization, that can mean you're getting bust, right? And so the key principle of that is, as an organization, the only sustainable competitive advantage for you is the speed at which you learn, right? How do you make sure you're continuously learning at speed? And in order to be able to do that, you've got no time for learning for the sake of learning. This idea of dumping a bunch of content and telling people to do stuff for the sake of doing it without actually knowing what skills it's moving, like what's the business priority here, what's the objective it's trying to drive. No one's got time for that, right? Learning at speed is not about doing everything faster. It's about cutting the waste. And waste is anything that doesn't connect the dots between learning skills and business performance is waste, right? It's a waste of time, it's a waste of resources. And so really going back to that, how are you going to connect these dots? What are the pieces you need to put into place to be able to do that? And that, more than anything, is a mindset shift, right? That you first, as the L&D professional, needs to go, look, I'm not here to just tick a box or push out content. I'm here to drive strategic change, right? And if I want the rest of the business to respect me as someone who's bringing value to the table, then I've got to change the way I'm talking about it, right? And that's the next thing I'd say is, to be able to speak business, you got to understand business. So you got to understand what the priority of the business is and align what you're doing to support that mission, strategy, and objectives.
This is how we learn now.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, SoEnergy, Forsaven, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.